JBS presents exclusive television coverage of the Jerusalem Post Conference from the Marriott Marquis Hotel in New York City.
Herb will stay on stage to interview someone who really doesn't need much of an introduction. The best way I thought that I could describe Professor Alan Dershowitz is to call him simply Israel's staunchest defender. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Professor Alan Dershowitz.
Welcome, Professor Dershowitz.
Thank you.
Look, Israel continues to poll pretty well in the American public, except for one demographic, and that's the progressives, the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party. Have we lost the progressives?
Well, the progressives have abandoned us. The progressives are largely repressives. There's very little progressive about what we see today on college campuses. They want speech codes, they want to bar conservative, Christian, pro-Israel speakers. They are intolerant. The biggest problem that we have today on college campuses, which represents the future, is the extreme left, the intolerant extreme left. They call themselves progressives. I call them regressives, repressives, and we have to make sure that they are marginalized within the mainstream Democratic Party. That's why I threatened to quit the Democratic Party if they elected Keith Ellison, who has close connections to anti-Semitism, close connections to bigotry. Fortunately, he was defeated. He is now the deputy chairman. I have to continue to fight within the left, within the liberal left, because there's an enormous difference between liberals and so-called progressives. And they're hard lines. Bernie Sanders was on Al Jazeera the other day strongly defending Israel. Now, there are those in the Democratic Party, though, who clearly have nothing good to say about Israel. But our job, my job as a liberal Democrat, is to fight within the Democratic Party to keep Israel a bipartisan issue, to make sure that it never becomes, that no election ever becomes a referendum on Israel. Because the one thing about elections, you can lose.
But how do you do that? I mean, we saw in the Democratic, in the primary in New York, that Israel was a big issue between Clinton and Sanders. How do you keep Israel from becoming a partisan issue?
Well, you fight very hard to persuade particularly young people that Israel is consistent with their values. If you're a feminist, you should be a supporter of Israel. Now, the City University of New York, of which I am a proud alum, is having as their graduation speaker at the public health school a bigoted woman who says that you can't be a Zionist and a feminist. Well, I don't think, in fact, you can be a supporter of the causes that she supports and be a real feminist. And I think that we have an obligation not to censor her, because that will fail. That's a tactic that always fails. But when she speaks at the City University graduation, she ought to be leafleted with tens of thousands of leaflets indicating what her real background and what her real program and what her real agenda is. We should use this as an educational moment, as an opportunity to teach young people that they have to oppose bigotry not only on the right, but on the left. That opposition to bigotry must also remain a bipartisan issue. You know, too often, people on the right are willing to give a pass to right-wing bigots. They're attacking only left-wing bigots. People on the left are willing to give a pass to left-wing bigots. They attack only right-wing bigots. There is no room for that. Bigotry on both sides must be attacked equally by both sides. Bigotry also, the attack on it must be a bipartisan issue.
Professor Dershowitz, I mean, you're a very strong voice for Israel on the left. Where are the other voices? I mean, Ed Koch died. That was a strong voice. Nobody's coming up.
We have to fight to make sure that people do come up. There are young people. Now, the problem is that there are groups that would like to turn Israel into a right-left issue. Some Jewish groups on the right would like to do that. Some Jewish groups on the left would like to do that. We have to fight it. Ron Lauder made a brilliant opening comment here today in which he talked about unity, in which he talked about emphasizing what brings us together. Look, we're Jews. You have how many hundreds of people in this room? You have that many opinions. You're never going to get unanimity on opinions about Israel. The Bible says we're kshei oref, we're stiff-necked people. We don't easily change our views, but we have to make what I call the 80% case, the case that Herzog and Bennett agree on. And there is a great deal that Herzog and Bennett agree on. They agree that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people, that it has the right to defend itself from enemies, that the Iran deal poses great dangers, that the UN resolution was a disaster, that anti-Semitism is growing in many parts of the left. We have to bring people together and de-emphasize the 20% that divides us, particularly now. I think there are real opportunities with this new administration to do something constructive in the Middle East. Look, we learned one important lesson, and this was written recently in a book that proved that when the United States has Israel's back, and when Israel feels strong, it is willing to make compromises and concessions. But when it feels that the United States doesn't have its back, it's not willing to make concessions, and that's clear. Under the Obama administration, it was understandably unwilling to make concessions because it did not believe that Obama had Israel's back. On the other hand, when President Clinton was the president, they did believe that President Clinton had Israel's back, and they were prepared to make the peace offer that Ehud Barak made in 2000-2001. Same thing was true with President Bush II. That's when Olmert was prepared to make in 2008 a very generous peace offer. So if you advocate peace, you should be advocating a strong Israel. BDS is anti-peace because it sends a horrible message to the Palestinian leadership that you can get a state without negotiation or compromise. Bringing Israel in front of the International Criminal Court would be against peace because it sends the same message. The message has to be Israel is going to be strong, the United States will have a major and continuing alliance with it, and then Israel can do the right thing based on its own democratic principles, and in the end, how Israel decides to resolve the Israel-Palestine conflict will be decided not in Washington, not at the UN, but in Israel itself, because Israel's a democracy.
You mentioned that under President Obama, Israel didn't feel that America had its back,
right.
and as a result, wasn't willing to make concessions. We're, 100 and some odd days after Trump's inauguration. What's your initial impressions of his Mideast steps?
Well, there's one thing that's very, very clear about President Trump. He is utterly unpredictable. We do not know what he's going to do next. We don't know what surprises he has up his sleeve when he goes and travels to the Middle East. We didn't know what his approach would be in the recent meeting with Abbas. And unpredictability is a double-edged sword. It may drive people together to try to create predictability from within because they're not getting it from outside, but it may also, because it produces uncertainty, make it more difficult to come to a peaceful resolution. I think we'll know a lot more about what the Trump policy is going to be in the next few weeks. Look, President Obama did not rule by policy. He did not have a policy. He had an ideology. He thought you could rule by ideology. That was a terrible, terrible mistake. His ideology is what led him not to keep his promise about the Syrian weapons of destruction. It's what led him to the Iran deal. It's what led him disgracefully to not veto that horrible UN resolution that basically says that the very Kotel that the previous panel appropriately was arguing over, there's no problem for J Street. There's no argument for J Street about the Kotel. According to J Street, the Kotel doesn't belong to Israel. According to J Street, the Kotel is illegally occupied territory. According to J Street and the Obama administration, the Hebrew University, the Hadassah Hospital, and the Jewish Quarter are not legitimately part of Israel. They're illegally occupied territory. How do you expect to make peace when people are promoting that kind of ahistorical nonsense and that kind of bigotry. And we have to fight it at every turn, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican.
You know, you mentioned the 80% of agreement between the right and the left, and between Bennett and Bougie. Is there an 80% agreement here among American Jews between J Street and between the ZOA?
Well, it's so interesting. I spoke at the ZOA recently, and I said, this is not a place that Herzl, Ben-Gurion, Henrietta Zoll today would be comfortable at, because the ZOA ought to be an umbrella group that represents all American Zionists. And American Zionists of the center-left and of the left would not feel comfortable to ZOA. The same thing is true with J Street. An American Zionist, a center-liberal like me, does not feel comfortable at J Street. J Street is not a pro-Israel organization. You cannot be a pro-Israel organization and support the Security Council resolution that declared the essential aspects of Jerusalem are illegally occupied territory. You can't be a pro-Israel organization and represent views that almost no one in Israel supports. So there are limits to what you call a pro-Israel organization. And we'll never get agreement between J Street and the ZOA. But I do think both J Street and the ZOA together represent 20%. And I think the mainstream of 80% Americans fall somewhere in the middle. And whether or not they favor one particular solution or another solution, they want a strong Israel, they want an Israel at peace, they want to see Startup Nation help the world. Look, who can doubt the following statements? No country in the history of the world has ever done more for humanity in the first 69 years of its existence than the State of Israel. When I spoke at the Oxford Union last year against BDS, I challenged the students. I said, name a single country in the world faced with threats comparable to those faced by Israel that has a better record of human rights, higher compliance with the rule of law, and more concern for the lives of enemy civilians. I said, I challenge you, name a country. Not a single person was prepared to get up and name a country in a hostile environment. And in the end, we won the debate against BDS because we were able to persuade open-minded students, the 80% in the middle, that history, morality, justice is on the side of Israel and against BDS. We just have to do a better job.
Thank you, Professor Dershowitz. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Our next speaker comes to us from Washington, D.C. Dr. Sebastian Gorka serves as a deputy assistant to President Trump, as a national security aide, and is one of the more recognizable faces of the administration in the media today. We thank Dr. Gorka for joining us here. His appearance at our conference was not without noise and controversy. And while I appreciate the emotions among some of you, this conference, like I mentioned in my introductory remarks, is about listening, is about being respectful, and is about giving people the opportunity to do what they came here to do, which is to speak. So while I understand we all have emotions, I kindly and would appreciate if we could all hold that back and allow me to interview Dr. Gorka on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Sebastian Gorka. Sebastian, thank you very much for being here today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It's an honor. Thank you, Jakob.
I want to jump straight into the thick of it. There have been reports...
Before you start,
Yes.
Go ahead. No, please.
Okay. There have been reports in the media that you have affiliations with different anti-Semitic Hungarian orders, such as the Vitezi Rend, which is said to have had ties with the Nazi regime. There are reports that you were sworn in secretly as a member of this order. You were shown wearing a medal belonging to this order. You must, I'm sure you're aware of the sensitivity that this has for the Jewish community. What can you say to address those reports?
Well, first things first, thank you for this opportunity. And I'd like to thank everybody who has stood by me and this administration for the last 15 weeks. Specifically, and I apologize in advance if I forgot you, but the two Davids, Ira, Bruce, Jeff, Mort, Joel, Noel, Noah, you know who you are, okay? And especially thank you to Rabbi Billet, who wrote just this Friday an amazing piece. So let's get to the heart of the matter. I have spent my life fighting against totalitarian ideologies, and so did my father. My father was 9 years old when World War II broke out. As he says in his memoirs, in 1944, after the Nazis took over Budapest at the age of 14, he escorted his fellow Jewish schoolmates who were forced to wear the Star of David to school every day and back to stop the local German forces from assaulting them or spitting on them. That's my father, okay? Later, he was forced to resist the communists. He fought back in university. He was betrayed by Kim Philby, arrested and tortured as a 20-year-old, often by secret police officers of the new communist regime who just a few months before had been members of the fascist Arrow Cross. I take that heritage very seriously, and when my father was awarded a medal in 1979 by anti-communist members of a splinter order outside Hungary, I take that as a mark of their suffering, and I am proud to wear that as a response to everything that we face today. Because for me, jihadis are linked to fascists because they are totalitarians. And that's why I am proud of working in administration. That, look, we can talk about bluster, we can talk about rhetoric, but the bottom line is nobody, not one person, not at the Forward, not at Politico, not at any other place, has found one sentence that I've ever said in the last 46 years that is anti-Semitic or anti-Israel. You'll find the opposite. You will find the opposite. And because we are pro-Israel, we must be attacked. Whether it's the president, whether it's Steve Bannon, whether it's Steve Miller or myself, we are friends of Israel.
But you must understand, Sebastian, you must understand the sensitivity here, right? This is a Jewish community here in the United States that feels very, sometimes insecure, feels at times that medals and affiliation with such orders could bring in types of sentiments into the White House that could be to the detriment
But
of
look at the facts. Look at the facts. Look at what the president has said. Look at what the vice president said just this week. We were celebrating the Independence Day of Israel. And what did the president say through the vice president? We will always unapologetically stand by Israel. That's the truth. That's the truth. And we're talking about an order. I don't want to get lost into the weeds. We've got important stuff to talk about. There are members of this order, like Vilmos Nagy, who was recognized in 1969 as a righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem. That's a member of the Vitis. Let's think about that for a second. Okay? So the politics in Central Europe is often very complicated, as you know.
There have been a lot of reports recently that you might be leaving the White House. It goes on. One day you're leaving, one day you're gone, and then the next day you're still there. So it seems like maybe infighting inside the White House. Can you shed some light on what's happening there?
Let me quote the boss. It's always good to quote the boss. As the president says, there's fake news, and then there's very fake news. The fact is, the White House works like a well-oiled machine. This idea that there are camps. There aren't camps inside the White House. There are patriots, lovers of America, friends of Israel that work together, whether it's Jared, with Steve, with Reince, with the president. The bottom line is there are some people who don't like our stance, that we wish to be a leader in the world. We wish to help our friends. And some of those people may be leaked to the press, or maybe they make stuff up. That's a sad reality, but we are going to hold the line.
So you're there to stay?
I will be there for as long as the president has use for me.
Okay. I want to switch gears for a moment. Before Donald Trump took office, there was a lot of skepticism about his approach to Israel, right? Pro-Israel, anti-Israel, what does he think about Israel? We see that he's keen on trying to renew peace talks between Israel and the Palestinians. He met last week with President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority. He's making a trip to a very historic visit to Israel as his first trip, or part of his trip, first overseas trip as president. I know it's not your specific portfolio, but what can you tell us about how the president views this alliance between Israel and the United States?
How he views it?
Yeah.
Again, it's our closest relationship. Our closest relationship. Look at who he's put in charge of this issue. It speaks volumes to the commitment of the president to Israel and to peace in the Middle East, by the fact that he put Jared Kushner, right, as his point person, and Jason Greenblatt as his special negotiator. That tells you just how committed he is. And on top of that, let's think about something. Who was this man before he became the commander-in-chief? This was a businessman who wasn't just successful, he was crushingly successful in the hardest market in the world. What's that market? New York real estate. So if there's a man who can bring a deal, who can bring peace, it is President Donald Trump.
His overall trip, though, which includes stops to Saudi Arabia, Israel, the Vatican, it's interesting, kind of the three monotheistic religions, the main centers of that. Is there some overarching or overall message here with this visit?
I think that the recognition of how important faith is, yeah? We had an administration who for the last 8 years said, didn't take faith seriously, may have gone to church or may have gone to temple, but saw it as a networking exercise, nothing more. And importantly, they didn't take our enemies' understanding of religion seriously. When you spend 8 years saying you can't talk about religion, you can't use the word jihad, it's all about jobs for jihadis, it's not about any kind of ideology. This administration understands the power of faith, the importance of faith, and the importance of those who are using faith to harm us. And I think that's the message that's being sent.
You've been said to have been one of the architects behind the change in rhetoric that we've noticed by President Trump already back in the campaign. The use of the term, which was, as you mentioned, highly controversial during the previous 8 years, of radical Islam, right? Why is that important? Why is it important for those two words to be said in conjunction with one another?
Imagine if in 1944, as America and her allies are preparing to storm the beaches at Normandy, imagine if anybody, the president, theater commander, a local unit leader, had said to the troops, okay, is your weapon ready? Is your chute ready? Is the barge ready? Oh, one last thing. When you land on the beaches, ready to fight, whatever you do, don't use the word Nazi, because you could annoy the Germans. That person would be fired, court-martialed, drummed out of the government, okay? We've had enough of that. We talk truthfully about the threat, and that's why people who don't want the truth to be told attack us. I think it's fascinating. Who are the leaders of the attacks, the slanders against this administration? Scratch it a little bit deeper, and who do you find? People who are either all connected to the BDS movement or people who are all pro-JCPOA Iran deal. Doesn't that tell you something? So we say, speak truthfully about the threats, and the president said, remember all the fake news about, oh, he's going to climb down and he's not going to talk about it the way he did during the campaign. Look at the video of the joint session of Congress. What was the moment where the president stopped and stressed 3 words the most? It's when he stopped, looked at the camera, and said, the enemy is radical Islamic terrorism. We are not stepping down. We are not watering down our message. He understands the threat, and he will obliterate it.
There are those, though, who say that this obsession or this way of categorizing and characterizing the threat makes you and the administration, but even particularly you, Islamophobe, right? That you're actually against Islam as a religion.
Let me, I had the honor of spending 6.5 years in the Defense Department teaching counterterrorism. And 40–50% of my students were Muslim officers, colonels or above. I learned from them the threat to this country. And when an Egyptian tells me that it's not a war with Islam, it's a war in Islam, I listen to him. When the Jordanians tell me that this is a religious war, but not against a religion, that would be absurd. Because I always ask people, do you remember that fighter pilot burnt alive in the cage? What religion was he? Was he Orthodox? Was he an Episcopalian? He was a Muslim. burnt alive by ISIS. So this is a war inside the faith for which version will be dominant. And we have to help our Muslim allies win. That's why the meetings with the King of Jordan, the meeting with President Sisi are so important. After Israel, these are our closest allies.
You know, one big change that we noticed, and the whole world noticed, was after the chemical weapons were used in Syria. Back in 2013, there was something called a red line, which was crossed and crossed again, but then somehow disappeared and never found again. But this time, when chemical weapons were used, Tomahawk missiles were fired and launched. What does that mean from the larger, if I take a zoom out for a moment, what does that say to the larger strategy of this president, of his intervention, foreign policy?
Two things, most importantly. Number one, when the last administration, in its own national security strategy, said that we are going to lead from behind, what does that mean in English? Follow, thank you, right? It's not leading, it's the opposite. It's standing back and letting other guys, usually bad guys, fill the vacuum. We have ended that. As the vice president said about 10 days ago on the deck of the USS Ronald Reagan, he said another very important thing. When the president wrote in his introduction to the national security strategy, we are now going to follow strategic patience, the vice president said, the era of strategic patience is over. We are going to lead. We are going to lead. So what does it mean? It means that when the president, and he took that decision, it might have been over a great chocolate cake, but he took that decision, okay? When he decides to launch those 59 cruise missiles, when his local commander dropped that Moab bomb in Afghanistan, I think everybody understands, you definitely understand. Everybody who understands geopolitics understands those two events were not about Afghanistan and not about Syria. They're about the return of American leadership and sending a very simple message. We are back and we will lead and we will, with our friends, destroy our enemies.
So when we think about moving towards the future, there's a lot of talk now about what's happening in Syria, splitting it up into different parts, pieces of land, and America not being able to fly over different parts. Do you have a vision? Is there a clear vision that you can maybe outline for us what might happen in Syria, which is obviously a very big concern for the state of Israel?
When you play poker, I don't know if you play poker.
Not too much.
If you played poker, do you show the other people at the table your playing cards? It's not a good idea. The last administration did that. They said, we're coming into Mosul in 2 months or 3 months. You do not tell your game plan in advance. It's not good strategy. What we talk about are objectives. And right now, we're not going to posit the future of Syria. We're going to do one thing. We're going to make sure the conflict ends. And on top of that, we've sent the very clear message. You will not, nobody will use weapons of mass destruction against unarmed women and children. The objective is to stop the war.
So lastly, if I look to ISIS for a moment, the president has laid out a plan to defeat ISIS, right? And I think a lot of the world is wondering how will that exactly work. So you might give me the poker answer again, but possibly not. But what I also want to maybe get at is, so ISIS, obviously a terrorist organization that is a major threat to a lot of the stability of America's allies in the region. But we in Israel face other terrorist organizations, such as Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Hezbollah in Lebanon, also fighting in Syria. Is there a view from the White House of these terrorist organizations as one?
So, what are we going to do? Again, we're not going to tell our strategy, but a couple of key points. The president has been explicit before January 20th and afterwards. He has absolutely zero interest in invading anybody's countries and occupying them. That is un-American, and this administration will not do it. What we will do is we will help our friends fight their own wars for themselves. So that's why it's crucial that our Sunni allies understand that now they can trust us. This is not the Obama administration, but we will help them to fight this war. On your question with regards to these organizations, it's patently obvious, and the president knows this absolutely. Every jihadist group whether it's Shia or whether it's Sunni, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's Hamas, whether it's ISIS, whether it's Al-Qaeda, they all feed from the same genetic code. What is that genetic code? The jihadi ideology of the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood started it all in 1928. And we know that they share the same goal, and that goal is against everything we represent. I won't talk about strategy, I'll talk about objective. This is just Sebastian Gorka. The objective we have is a very simple one. We know we will have won when the black flag of jihad is as reviled and rejected around the world as the swastika of the Nazi Third Reich. When that happens, we will have won. And we didn't rehearse this, so I didn't get a chance to ask you, but I have to commend you, I don't know if it was your choice, but to hold this event on the 7th of May was delightful, because as you all know, the 7th of May is the day that the Nazi Third Reich surrendered to the Allies. So, thank you.
Dr. Gorka, thank you very much.
Thank you, it's been a pleasure.
My dear and esteemed colleague and friend, Carolyn Glick is a senior contributing editor at the Jerusalem Post, and without question, our most popular columnist. Carolyn, the recipient of numerous awards, does something many writers struggle with, translating tough issues into clear words that more than get her strong and powerful message across. Please join me in welcoming Carolyn V Glick.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you all for staying till the end of this conference, which really, I think, from year to year, we go from strength to strength, and I don't know about you, but I just thought that the day's remarks by everybody have just been extraordinary, and I know it's been enlightening for me, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I. I don't want to belabor how wonderful it is, but I think one of the things that really is inspiring about the conference that we had today is that it shows just how extraordinary Israel is, and what a strong and vibrant and really miraculous country it is 69 years after its founding, which came, of course, 3 years after May 7th, 1944, when Germany surrendered to the Allies, 45. And so we really see what happened to the Jewish people in Israel and how extraordinary the accomplishments of all the people who have built this country and continue to build this country today really are and have been, and how important they are not only for the Jewish people but really for the entire world. Rather than talking about how great everything is, I want to turn my attention, as is my wont, to things that aren't doing as well. I consider it to be my position, my job to challenge my readers, to challenge you, to challenge the Jewish people and our allies to do better. We can do more. And one of the ways that we could do more, for instance, would be to have Grace Meng to be elected the chairwoman of the DNC. And really what's so extraordinary about her is what an extraordinary friend she is to the Jewish people here in New York City and to the Jewish people in the United States and in Israel, and we really have to admire her for that. And we have to stand with her for that, just as we have to stand with all of our friends here in the United States and around the world, and we have to challenge and confront and oppose our enemies here in the United States and throughout the world. And I fear that today in the Jewish community in the United States there is an alarming unwillingness to do both of those things. And to just focus my remarks for a second, I just want to start by saying I'm going to be talking about two people in particular. One is a woman named Linda Sarsour, and the other one is a gentleman that you met this morning named Sebastian Gorka, because I think that in their twin stories, we really do see the central challenge that's facing specifically the American Jewish community today. And I think that I would be irresponsible if I let this conference go without mentioning this very central challenge to the vibrancy and well-being in many ways of this community and the freedom of this community that I grew up in, that my family are members of. So here, I think it's one of the things that I want to say is that one of the previous speakers mentioned that Zambish had said, one of the veterans of the Six-Day War and liberators of Jerusalem, said that we weren't responding to the Jordan Legion, we were responding in 1967 to Titus. One of the things that we don't know, and I only just learned and I was shocked to find out, is that General Titus's chief of staff was an apostate Jew. His father was the chief rabbi of Alexandria. I forgot his name. And I think that it's important for us to recognize that sometimes we do see Jews playing, or Jews by birth playing very destructive roles for the Jewish community. We saw it throughout the Middle Ages, certainly in Europe. And today we have a situation in the Democratic Party where, to the side of extraordinary friends of the Jewish people like Congresswoman Grace Meng, we have a rising star by the name of Linda Sarsour. Linda Sarsour was extolled by President Obama as a change maker, I think he called her. She was listed as one of the most influential people by Time magazine last year. She was the head of the Women's March that opposed President Trump the day after his inauguration. And not to put too fine a point on it, but she's an anti-Semite. Linda Sarsour has said that there's nothing creepier than Zionism. She said that Zionist women cannot be feminists. She's a major supporter of BDS. She supports Hamas. She's tweeted in favor of Palestinians stoning Israeli cars. And she's going to actually be a commencement speaker at CUNY on June 1st. So when my colleague and friend, Mort Klein from the ZOA, that's right, began to raise holy hell over the fact that she was just bestowed this honor, just as others had, including Mort Klein, raised holy hell about the fact that she was one of the principal organizers of the March of Women on January 21st in Washington, D.C. We found that the hierarchy of the Democratic Party circled the wagons and is backing her, in fact, to the point where recently a vice chairman of the DNC from here in New York City by the name of Michael Blake tweeted a post a couple weeks ago saying that nobody should be challenging Linda Sarsour and that the Democratic Party has to stand by her. She was a superdelegate at the Democratic Convention over the summer. And the distressing thing to me is that while two congressmen have called on CUNY to disinvite Linda Sarsour from speaking at the commencement of CUNY's School of Public Health, the vast majority of the Jewish organizations that are headquartered in this country, in this city, have not. The Anti-Defamation League has been silent on it. The American Jewish Committee has been silent on it. And this is very disturbing to me because it's not a question of just not wanting to be a part of something. You see here a woman who really is a bigot towards Jews, towards Jewish Americans, who supports BDS, which really is about making it impossible for Jewish Americans on college campuses and other places to freely express their support for Israel and their identification with Zionism, the Jewish National Liberation Movement. And she's being upheld, and she's being honored. She's being extolled as a role model for graduates of CUNY's Graduate School of Public Health because she is going to be speaking at their commencement ceremony. And this is something that simply should be fought, because if she's allowed to rise without a massive outcry from the Jewish community about the direction that things are going in the Democratic Party, we can't be surprised that she and others like her will continue to be empowered in that party. It's the job of the Jewish American community to stand up for itself, to stand up for its freedoms, and to speak truth to the institutions that they're most identified with, including the Democratic Party, and say, this is our home as Americans, and we're not at home in a party that empowers anti-Semites like Linda Sarsour. And so it's not a question of simply not wanting to get involved. It's a question of complicity with the rise of forces that are bigoted towards the American Jewish community. And I truly believe that this is something that just isn't right and has to be changed very quickly. And on the other hand, we have Dr. Gorka, who, aside from the fact that I'm honored and privileged to number him among my personal friends, is a true friend of the Jewish community in the United States and a true friend of Israel in the White House. He's an advocate for a strong U.S.-Israel alliance in the halls of power where he sits. Throughout his career, he has been an outspoken supporter of Israel and defender of Israel against all takers. And yet, he right now is the focus of a very deliberate and slanderous campaign to castigate him as a Nazi. And the worst thing about this horrible, slanderous campaign against this very good and honorable man and true friend of the Jewish people is that it's being conducted by American Jews in the name of fighting anti-Semitism. And I find this deeply distressing. I find it deeply distressing. The other day I went onto the Forward's webpage. I think that they've published something like 39 articles against him in the past several weeks. They're raising money on their campaign against him. Saying the New Yorker says that the Forward is leading the campaign against Sebastian Gorka. Please send $10. This is simply an outrage. It's simply an outrage, and it's Lashon Hara, and it's an embarrassment, and it's demoralizing. It's demoralizing to Israel's friends, of whom Israel has millions and millions, and the Jewish community has millions and millions, tens of millions in the United States, who support Israel, who support and want to protect Jewish freedom in this country, who support a strong American-Israel alliance, and who want to ensure that both countries are safe and prosperous for the long haul. When you see that prestigious, distinguished members of the Jewish community have taken it upon themselves to demonize one of Israel's best friends in Washington today. And again here, my friend and colleague, Mort Klein, is one of the leading and lone members of the public diplomacy, of the public world in the United States that is defending him. You had 51 Democratic congressmen signing a letter to President Trump demanding that he be fired for nothing, for lies. This is something that, again, it challenges the Jewish community. It says to the Jews of the United States, where are your voices? Stand up for our friend. Stand up for our friend. Don't allow people to slander a good and honorable man as a Nazi. I think it's important to understand that this is a precarious situation. You guys know, you live here in New York City, that there's a tremendous amount of rage in this country. There's a great division in this country about a lot of things, And the Trump presidency is a gift, I believe, to the American people. It's certainly a gift to Israel. But whatever you may think of Donald Trump's presidency, whether you like it or you dislike it, you understand that he was elected president of the United States, and he has the right and the duty to lead this country for the next 4 years. And for the benefit of the United States of America, all Americans of goodwill should hope that he succeeds in that mission. One of the ways that we have to work to ensure that he is successful both for the betterment of the United States of America and for Israel and for the entire free world is to ensure that the Jewish community is able to get it right, is able to understand that while it's true that the vast majority of the Jewish community in the United States is not supportive of the Republican Party or of the Republican president now sitting in the White House, that they have to stand by truth. They cannot castigate people and demonize people who are true friends of the Jewish people. They cannot be silent when other people are doing that. They cannot simply say, well, you know, it's just, maybe there's something to it, and you have to check it out, like Rabbi Billet of Young Israel did in the 5 Towns when he wrote an article over the weekend before Shabbat, obviously published in Allgemeiner, where he set out, chapter and verse, all of the lies that are at the heart and soul and details of the slander of Sebastian Gorka. You have to be able to look into something and say, how can our community be involved with the slander of this man? It's a horrible thing. It's a horrible thing. And how is it possible that Linda Sarsour is given legitimacy by the second largest party in this two-party country as a champion of human rights and a champion of women's rights when she denies the Jewish people our human rights and our civil rights, when through the BDS movement she wants to silence the voices and deny freedom of speech and expression to Jewish Americans on college campuses throughout this country, when she would want to deny Jewish women the right to call themselves feminists because they support Israel. We have a lot to celebrate today. We have a lot to celebrate as Jews, and you saw so many of the reasons for it today throughout this conference. There are enormous reasons and sources for optimism going forward tomorrow, next week, next month, and into the years to come, and as we look forward to the future of our children and our grandchildren. But in order to ensure that the promise that we see today in so many different spheres that we heard so much about throughout this really thrilling conference, we have to ensure that we get the basics right. And the basics are this: you have to stand with your friends, and you have to oppose your enemies, because then people will want to be your friends and they won't want to be your enemies. There are enough people out there who are enemies of the Jewish people and who are enemies of the United States. We have to be able to stand united as the Jewish people, the Jewish community of the United States, and the Jewish people in Israel, the largest Jewish community in the world today, and say, we stand for freedom, not only for others, but also for ourselves. And that means that we're going to stand with the people who defend that freedom, and we're going to oppose those that don't. These are the basic things that we need to do on a daily basis to ensure that all the extraordinary things that are happening in the world today, in the Jewish world today, are able to live out their potential, and we can continue to celebrate our luck in being Jews today and into the future. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for coming. Thank you very much.
And one of the other, I was just saying, come over here.
Okay. Hi, how are you?
This is the fan favorite, Mazal Tov. Just marvelous.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
And the way in which you're received, you've earned and is well deserved. You had some lovely things to say about the conference this year.
Right.
I was saying just a moment ago, and we're live here all across America, and
Hi, America.
In Israel and everywhere. I thought in many ways there were fabulous moments in this conference from beginning to end. Every conference has ups and downs, its moments, but there were a lot of moments, and yours was one of the really inspiring moments. But I want to know from your perspective, as you listen to the people speak who came before you, was there any moment that really grabbed you and you said to yourself, oh, I'm so glad both there's an audience of hundreds here and all across America and all across the world? What touched you most, Carolyn?
Ooh, that's a hard one. There were so many highlights, and I have to say that I really, first of all, I really loved hearing what the senators said, and also what Grace Meng said, Congresswoman Grace Meng. I thought that all three of them spoke so well, and it was really empowering to see what extraordinary friends we have in Congress. Again, it's always nice to be reminded of that. And from the Israeli perspective, you know, I thought that Naftali Bennett gave a stem winder, and so did Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked. I managed to see both of those, as well as Minister Ophir Okunis spoke extraordinarily well. So what can I say? I was thrilling.
A lot of good moments. By the way, anybody who's going to be up on that stage, there's something here called a green room, and very often the speakers are in the green room. Nobody sees the whole thing. So it was a little unfair question to ask you. Look, I want to know from your perspective, not about you personally, but as you get a feel for how the Israeli people are feeling about the election here in America of President Donald Trump. What's your, and again, nothing's monolithic, but in general, what's your sense, Carolyn, of how the Israeli people are now viewing the new American administration?
I think that, you know, when he was elected, I think there was a lot of euphoria in Israel, that we were going to see an unwinding of Obama's 8-year legacy of hostility towards Israel, and I think that a lot of people very excited about that. Certainly the tone is very different, and the relationship is very different between Jerusalem and Washington, and I think that also speaks of, you know, what the source of so much of the acrimony in the relationship was. President Trump said, I think, right after his election, oh, I solved everything with Israel. I spoke to Netanyahu, and now all the bad things are over. And I think that there was a collective sigh of relief in Israel, not only from hearing that, but really from feeling that. I think right now there's a lot of concern about the direction he wants to take U.S. diplomacy vis-a-vis the PLO, and we'll have to see how that plays out.
Does it worry you?
Oh, very much. I mean, I dedicated an entire column to it on Friday. You can check it out on the JPost.com or on my website. Yeah.
Last question. You wrote this fabulous book about a one-state solution. Yes. There are many people who feel that some of the things you said in that book, which you were ridiculed by some, a lot of people wanted no part of it.
Right.
Time moves on.
Yes, it does.
And there's a real sense now that even those who would love there to be a two-state solution but don't believe it's possible, right, in our lifetime, maybe our children's lifetime. The issue then becomes, what does Israel do in the meantime? Now that's worth an hour discussion.
Right, sure.
At the same time, Al Regel Achat, give me your sense, because when Naftali Bennett comes on and talks about autonomy, people are saying, yes, what's that all about? From your perspective, if there is going to be no two-state solution, how does Israel now go forward dealing with not simply what's internal to Israel, but the West Bank and Judea, Samaria, etc.?
I think that the whole concept of solution is a McDonald's view of foreign affairs, meaning that you're just going to get instant gratification for everything right now, and peace now, perfect now, euphoria now, utopia now. These are all childish ways of looking at a very complicated world, and particularly when you see the chaos of the Arab world and the collapse of Arab nationalism and the Arab nation states, and the notion that if you make another Arab nation state out of a people that has never done anything except produce gangsters and terrorists, that's going to be conducive to something positive, I think is pretty unhinged. But I think that what Minister Bennett, Naftali Bennett, proposes is certainly a reasonable place to park this for a while, which is that Israel would apply Israeli law to really the only place that isn't under a clear legal code, a Palestinian legal code or an Israeli legal code, which is Area C of Judea and Samaria. That area is now about to celebrate the 50th anniversary of it being under a military administration. And it's really not reasonable from an administrative perspective, from a law and order perspective, from a civil rights perspective, that the military government should continue. So I think that, we don't know what's going to be with the Palestinians right now. And how they're going to behave going forward, whether there'll ever be a chance of making peace with them. But in the meantime, we have to take care of what we can take care of, and that is an acute need from an administrative perspective to apply Israeli law to those areas. And that means that as well, the 400,000 Israelis who live there and the 100,000, give or take, Palestinians who live there will be governed by Israeli law, and the Palestinians, if they so desire, can apply for Israeli citizenship under this option. And I think that, as the situation is so fluid, that this provides us with a stable point to stop at for a while. And, we Jews, when we talk about a while, 40 is always a big number, or 20 years it was quiet in the land, or 40 days or 40 years in the desert. So I think if we could reach a stable endpoint of 20 to 40 years here, I think that would be good life's work done. And I think that we've been suffering through 24 years now of chaos and instability and terrorism since the start of the Oslo process. And it's time to change the paradigm from solutions and instant gratification to how do we go forward from a level-headed perspective and put ourselves in a better position given the instability and chaos that engulfs our region.
Whether you agree with everything Carolyn says or not, she is one of the most important voices now. Yotzei min hakol.
Thank you very much.
You are out of this world, and it's a pleasure always having you on. We'll chase you when you get back to Israel, and anytime you're here, we'll try to get you in studio.
But I'm pretty fast, but it's always nice talking to you.
You're wonderful. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Carolyn Glick.
Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed JBS's exclusive television coverage of the Jerusalem Post Conference from the Marriott Marquis Hotel in New York City. And we hope you'll stay right here on JBS for more of the best Jewish programming from all over the world. JBS, expanding Jewish understanding, celebrating all things Jewish.